Welcome to the Growth Mindset Podcast with me, Sam Harris, your host. I invite fascinating humans from all walks of life to share their wisdom and unpack their mindsets and formulas for growth. Welcome to the podcast. It's my delight to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I like to start things with just a bit of an overview of like the guests of where you came from, like origin stories, and what did you do when you were young? Why did you make the decision to go in, like what you studied, and then how did that lead to where you're at now? You don't necessarily have to fit that all into one straight away answer, but a few highlights. We can like dig into different things.
So I'll do my best to give you a whirlwind tour of the life of Tessa, which all starts on my parents' farm up in North Yorkshire. And I grew up there with two younger brothers and had a childhood that involved just an awful lot of hard work, really, sort of on the family farm. It was quite an isolated upbringing. And as a result of that upbringing, I grew up with a really keen appreciation for the value of food. And that sort of what I'm doing now with Olio has very much kind of brought me back full circle to that. Although obviously at the time, I didn't know where this was going to lead. And actually, after having sort of spent 21 years living on the farm, when it came to graduating from university, I realised that the last thing I wanted to do was become a farmer or indeed a farmer's wife. And so I resolved to kind of move as far away from the farm as possible, which resulted in me moving to London. And I pursued for the next sort of 15 years or so what could be described as a fairly classic corporate career. I started off as a strategy consultant because I had no clue what I wanted to do in my life. And that seemed like a really good thing to do if you don't know what you want to do. And indeed it was. It gave me kind of great exposure to lots of different industries and lots of different types of businesses. And then after a couple of years of doing that, I moved over into industry and away from consulting. So I was kind of sick and tired of strategizing and not actually doing any operations or implementation. And then moved into the media industry, and then after that into the retail industry, and after that into financial services. And throughout that sort of progression, I was increasingly focusing on the digital space because I could see very clearly what was happening, kind of the digitization of the world, and that's where all the growth and opportunities would be. But I definitely had this sort of nagging sense that I hadn't yet, whilst I had a CV that looked great on paper, I hadn't yet done anything that would make me feel really proud if I were to be on my deathbed. And I had a growing entrepreneurial itch and was attending sort of leadership courses, which I was very privileged to attend through my corporate career, and was finding myself really super inspired by all the people that I was hearing from who were speaking from the stage, and then stopping and reflecting, looking at my life and just feeling really, really uninspired by myself. And I was getting really frustrated with being uninspired by myself. And so that gave me the resolve to do something about it. And I knew that I wanted to do something entrepreneurial, but I just didn't know what. And I spent several years sort of thinking, I want to do something entrepreneurial, but I don't have an idea. And that all changed through a tiny moment in my life 7 years ago now, when I was living and working in Switzerland and moving back to the UK. And on moving day, the removal men told me I had to throw away all of our uneaten food. And obviously, I've told you about my childhood upbringing. Being a farmer's daughter, I have a pathological hatred of food waste. So I wasn't prepared to do that. And so instead, I set out into the streets to try and find someone to give my food to. And to cut a long story short, failed miserably. Wasn't to be defeated, though. I went back to my apartment. And when the packing men weren't looking, I smuggled the non-perishable food into the bottom of my packing boxes. And that was the moment when I thought, there has to be a better solution than this. I had worked in digital for 10 years. I knew there's an app for everything, and I couldn't believe there wasn't a simple app where I could share my food with my neighbours. And so that was the light bulb moment for Olio that's then kind of set me on very much into kind of the second half of my career of being a startup co-founder.
Wow. Yeah, it's a nice shift. Interesting. Because I do hear from like a lot of people who want to start a business and have a bit of an itch, but then don't have an idea. And I often sort of feel like it's not a good reason to sort of go into starting a business just because you want to start a business. You definitely need to have something that you want to start, which can be harder when you haven't started anything. So I think I've been pretty lucky in that I started really early. So you just sort of spot opportunities to start new businesses ideas. So I feel like now that you've run a business, you probably see things that could be businesses around you more often, perhaps.
Yeah, 100%. I now look back on it and I realise that I was going about it completely the wrong way. I was sort of wandering around the world bemoaning the fact that I didn't have an idea. And I've now realised that what I should have done was open up a notebook and go out into the world for 24 hours or a week or whatever it might be, and just write down and document every single problem that I encountered in the world. And then force myself to dig into that and figure out which one of those problems really excites me. Which one of those do I feel like I've been put on this planet to solve? So my top tip would definitely be stop sort of worrying about the fact that you haven't got an idea and start focusing on finding a problem that you're really, really passionate about solving.
Yeah, because people go around more I need an idea that makes sense, that will make like millions of dollars, and that's something I could then kick off with. But you're like,
Well, also, I think very
just
rarely.
Just super annoys you.
Yeah, I mean,
and then it'll probably will end up getting there, but you don't really necessarily see the business model straight away, which I think what you do.
And very rarely is it your initial idea that is the one that creates the breakthrough and grows and becomes an actual business. And I actually think it's really dangerous to get wed to your idea, because then you become really, really inflexible in the face of market feedback that perhaps suggests that maybe your idea wasn't a great idea after all. And far better is to say, what is the problem that needs to be solved in this world? And I am prepared to commit the next 5 or 10 years of my life plus to solving. And then you kind of iterate on and test and experiment around all the different ways in which you could solve that problem. And actually, you've got to be really, really unemotional about sort of your idea, and you just need to fixate on solving the problem in the best possible way.
Yeah, as in like the idea business is basically just like a strategy for solving the problem.
Well, your idea really should be kind of, it's one hypothesis as to how the problem could be solved, and that hypothesis might or might not work. And for most entrepreneurs, if we're being really honest with ourselves, it's very rarely sort of the first idea in its purest form. It's very, very rare that the business ends up being like that, let's say 5 years later. And Olio is a classic example of that. When I first came up with this idea of a neighbour-to-neighbour food sharing app, at that time of founding, I did not have sort of the idea of a network of volunteers collecting and redistributing unsold food from local businesses. That was not a core part of the idea, but when Sasha and I started working on the problem and figuring out the way to solve the problem of food waste, that then came into the mix.
There's some other things I did want to go back to, but now that you've sort of spoken about earlier a bit, I think it would make sense to just explain it properly rather than kind of be alluding to this business that you sort of run at the moment and be like, right, this is Olio, just to like park that as a
sure thing.
piece of
So Olio is an app that exists to tackle the enormous problem of food waste, specifically in the home and local community. And we do that by connecting people with their neighbours so that they can give away rather than throw away their spare food and other household items. And so how it works is if you've got some food that you want to give away, then you just, or as I say, any household item, you can just snap a photo and add it to the app. Neighbours living nearby get an alert. They can browse the listings, request what they want, and pop round and pick it up. And it's really important to stress that this is a sort of in real life thing. The real magic of Olio actually is not the app at all. It's the community. It's that connection that takes place sort of on the doorstep where two people are meeting to ensure that something is given away rather than thrown away. And we have about 5 million members in our community, and we have had items successfully shared in, actually, as of today, it's gone up to 62 different countries.
That's amazing. So, yeah, remember you guys starting quite a long time ago. Didn't realise it was 7 years ago, but you weren't in 62 countries then.
No.
Wow. Yeah, that's insane. Was that, because certainly you had the idea, and it's not one that hits you with a how you make money out of it idea. It's just like it's a really useful app that like I want to have around, kind of like sort of free cycle or something. I don't see like couch surfing. It's sort of like a nice thing that should exist, but the commercial model isn't obvious. How long did it take you to work out how to make money and to convince people to back you as a business to start?
Well, they're two sort of separate questions. So let's take the...
I realised as I said it, I'm like, I'm making a mess here.
No, not at all. But the sort of figuring out how to make money, the reality is we had lots of hypotheses before we launched Olio as to how we could make money, and we modelled out the most promising ones of those. And the reality is we have tested and experimented with a couple of models of monetization, and we've still got several more that we need to test and experiment with. But for the first couple of years, we weren't focused on monetization because we always knew that Olio was a volume that would only be able to meaningfully generate revenues once we were operating at scale. And so we needed millions of people using the app before we could generate any meaningful revenues. And when you're an early stage startup, you have extremely limited resource. In the early days, we had just 2 developers for several years. For us, it felt more important that they were focused on building the most brilliant product and user experience rather than trying to monetize the square root of nobody. But our most meaningful and successful foray into monetization so far has been around our Food Waste Heroes program. So this is where we nowadays have 40,000 trained volunteers who are members of our community who we recruit through the app. We train them online in our food safety management system and match them with their local business, such as a Tesco or Pret-a-Manger. And those volunteers in their allotted time and day will pop out the house across the street. They'll pick up unsold food from that local business. They'll take it home. They'll add it to the app. Within minutes, the neighbours are requesting it. Minutes later, they're popping around to pick it up. And that enables those businesses to have zero food waste locations. And at the moment, those businesses are paying a waste contractor to take that food away, where sadly it is not eaten and often is ending up in livestock feed or anaerobic digestion or even landfill. And instead, they now pay us to ensure that that food is eaten by multiple homes in the local community. So that is our main revenue model. And we've found enormous product market fit there because businesses are recognizing now that they can no longer be seen to be throwing away perfectly good food, and they need to have a solution that will enable them to get to zero food waste locations. And that's critical, especially in light of the race to net zero, which is now firmly on, and with the increased focus on ESG and sustainability goals. But so the monetization piece will continue to be a work in progress over the next couple of years. We've also got a freemium model that we've just fairly recently implemented on the C2C side. So essentially that enables a subset of our community to upgrade to be able to unlock certain features within the app. So monetization continues to be a work in progress. With regards to the investment piece, again, given that we knew that we wouldn't be able to generate meaningful revenues until we're at scale, we always knew that we would need to unlock investment. And we raised a seed round of financing at the end of our very first year of setting up Olio.
So that's nice. Did you have much trouble raising that seed round when it's like a few crazy ladies trying to get the world from food waste? Or did it come across as like, hey, I've had this career in corporate, I know exactly how to run a business, this is what's going to work?
Yeah, so our seed round actually was the easiest round of fundraising we've ever done, and everything since then has been exponentially harder. The reason why our seed round was relatively easy was because I went to ask for advice and ended up getting investment. And what we were able to do with that seed round was really demonstrate here is an enormous problem that at that point in time, back in 2015, nobody was talking about or tackling. So, just very briefly, globally, a third of all the food we produce each year is thrown away, which is worth over $1 trillion. And in a country such as the UK or US, half of all food waste takes place in the home. So this is an enormous sort of problem. And our solution was very innovative and unique. And both Sasha and I, yes, had sort of pretty long corporate careers up until that point in time. And we had launched a proof of concept and it was getting some really interesting traction. Fundraising since then has definitely been more challenging, I think, because we're sort of a female-founded tech for good pre-revenue business, or we have been for much of our fundraising journey, and all of those things make fundraising just a lot more challenging.
Yes. Did you have any lessons or tips that sort of helped with overcoming any of those three barriers? Or was it more a case of finding the right investors?
Sadly, those barriers weren't much we could do about. We couldn't change our gender. We were not going to change our mission with Tech for Good, and we didn't have an enormous amount of leeway in terms of the monetization piece. So absolutely, we had to develop a number of coping strategies. I think one that I've spent a lot of time really working on is the female founder piece. So in the UK, roughly 1% of all venture capital investment goes to female founded businesses, 89% goes to male founded businesses, and 10% goes to mixed teams. And I personally found it very helpful being very clear-eyed about the statistics going into the fundraising process, as depressing as it was, because I do think that sort of forewarned is forearmed. And I did a lot of research into the research about why female-founded businesses don't get as much funding, etc., and definitely adopted a number of coping mechanisms to really try and counter that. One of which, kind of very tactically, we discovered that it was very powerful if actually the first slide of our pitch deck was a slide that had a bunch of logos and super senior job titles, which essentially kind of established our credibility as founders so that people took us seriously rather than just dismissing us as two girls, which is what was often happening before. But there are, so many things that we've kind of learned on that fundraising journey. But the thing I definitely recommend any female founders do is watch a video by a lady called Dana Kanzi. It's a Harvard Business Review talk that she does, and she talks about how female founders are asked prevention questions, which is all about the downside, the risks associated with a business, whereas male founders are asked about promotion questions, which is all about the upside. How fast can you grow? How big can this be? And the trick to dealing with that is to answer prevention questions with a promotion response. And so I think just understanding a lot of these nuances and the conscious and unconscious bias and being aware of it is really helpful going into the process. And then the other thing really that's critical is just to select your prospective investors very, very carefully. And this applies to the fact that we're female founded plus tech for good. It dramatically sort of limits the size of the pool of investors that are going to be interested in our type of business. And in particular, in my experience, we've found that investors that have very diverse investment committees are much more likely to be a good fit for us than ones that are sort of pale, male and stale.
Yeah, nice. Well, all really useful tips. Thank you very much. And the prevention versus promotion talk, I think, is a really good one to recommend people to go and watch. And because I've had people on the show before talking about different types of mindsets, and the prevention versus promotion mindset is actually very important just in general life around just how you go about things. There's been lots of studies around you're just going to do much better if you have a promotion mindset, and you're just going to see the opportunities that are there and like see the upside of things. And so as well as for actual founders trying to raise around to rephrase things in a promotion style, I think it's just as useful for the VCs to actually realize what they're hindering themselves from by adopting the prevention mindset when they're talking to female founders, because it doesn't really do anyone any favors.
No, it doesn't. And sort of even worse than that, I feel very frustrated by it, because I firmly believe that the investment community is shortchanging humanity by taking this approach, because in my experience, it is the most diverse founders, not just in terms of gender, but also in terms of ethnicity and sociodemographics. It's the most diverse founders who are tackling the biggest problems facing humanity today. And yet they are being woefully underinvested in. And that's really, really concerning for the fate of humanity. Yeah.
It's just 100% true. The amount of white founders building businesses that are just more about money or like problems for people that are
first world problems that don't need solving. Your deliveries being
exactly.
Your groceries being delivered in 15 minutes, for example.
Yeah, 100%. That is not a massive requirement in my life at all. And yet there's so many businesses doing it now.
Yeah.
What's going on? Yeah. And that's another one around. So have you had much competition? Because there's other apps like, things like Oddbox and stuff, you're doing great stuff in this space, but it's not really directly competing with you at all.
So we are really clear about what our competition is, and it's not another app. Our competition is the bin, because that is where the vast majority of surplus food is ending up. So we know that we have to design a user experience that is as close to the bin as possible in terms of convenience, but that massively outperforms the bin in terms of helping people feel great about themselves. So connecting them to their local community, helping them build relationships and friendships, giving them back their impact data so they understand the positive effect that these small actions they're taking are having. And I think that is something that an app can do that the bin can't.
Yeah, which it's great. As I've had some flatmates that I haven't used the app a lot because of I deliberately don't waste my food much, but I've got my flatmates to use it. So I used it for their stuff a few times and then got them onto it, which is great. Because, flatmates are just were very wasteful. But then I've made it to the point where like they actually quite enjoy getting rid of their salad they always buy too much of and other things.
Yeah, it feels great.
Nice.
If we're sort of if you think back to the evolution of humans, we have evolved to feel really good sharing food, because food at the end of the day is our life source. We literally depend upon it to stay alive, and sharing food is one of the core reasons why we've been so successful as a species. We're very unique in that we share our food, and so it feels really, really good to give something away to someone who wants it or maybe even needs it. And equally, it feels pretty horrible to throw perfectly good food in the bin.
Yeah, 100%. And super annoying when you get to things where you just get given way more food than you expect. You can't do anything with it other than eat it, and you're like,
you're like, it's either my waistline or the environment help. Yeah, I hear you, which is a big part of the reason why I was very excited to launch Olio to solve this problem.
Nice. Cool. So in terms of going to flip between her life stories a little bit, so back to when you were first on the farm and then like your like childhood, what were the kind of main things besides just the value of food that you think you enjoyed and set you up for like later life in a good way?
It's funny because I spent my whole childhood really hiding the fact that I was from a farm, because that was what made me sort of weird and unusual and different. And as a kid, you have this very strong instinct, I think, to sort of fit in and to be quote unquote normal. As I get older, I now reflect on my childhood and think of all the things that I learned there that I think have been incredibly valuable. So one of which is resilience. So when you are brought up on a farm, I've already touched on the fact that you just have to work incredibly hard. You really are up sort of at the crack of dawn, and you come, hail, wind, rain, mud, it doesn't matter what, you have to go out there, you have to feed the animals, the work has to be done. But the resilience piece specifically comes from the fact that there are so few variables that are within your control on the farm. You can't control the weather, you can't control animals, you can't control the machinery. Every single day something goes wrong on a farm, and that means that you just become really, really adept at problem solving, and also just staying very unflappable in the face of massive adversity. And I do think that's something that has been really helpful for me through my business career, because ultimately business is all about solving problems. So that, I think, has been really helpful. Understanding kind of, it sounds a little grandiose, but kind of systems thinking. So when you live and work on a farm, you understand the role that we play in part of that kind of that broader ecosystem and the kind of the system of nature. And you understand the concept of knock-on effects and the concept of waste, the concept of unintended consequences. And that, I think, is something that, as I've been founding Olio, I spend a lot of time thinking about just kind of the systems that humanity have built, in particular around consumption and our economy and our ways of living, and how Olio can try and sort of interject and change and improve those things. I think also you learn about testing and experimentation. So you're constantly having, and resourcefulness. So when you have these problems that you encounter, you then have to use whatever resources that you have available at your disposal to try and fix and solve those problems. And you have to experiment with how you solve those problems. And often those experiments don't work. You try and sort of rebuild the fence in this way and it doesn't work, or it breaks. And again, I just think that an ability to experiment with things really rapidly, in particular for an early stage startup, is a really important skill set to have. And then the other thing, the final thing probably around sort of people, was I was the eldest sister with two very bolshy sort of younger brothers who didn't necessarily take instruction very kindly. And so I had to learn lots of leadership skills and powers of persuasion to encourage them to do the work that our parents had asked us to do.
Nice. That's a huge life skill.
Yeah.
But yeah, in general, I'm here now being like, I should make sure I invest in more farmers because of
do you know what? It's
perfect upbringing.
Yeah, do you know what? It's funny you should say that, actually. So every now and then I'm sort of encountering more and more farmers, actually, both as entrepreneurs and as investors. And I find it really interesting because I haven't generally encountered that many farmers in my corporate career to date at all. So yeah, I do think there's some really interesting skill sets there.
Yeah, there's a bunch of really useful mindsets and skills just for life. But especially if you're trying to be more entrepreneurial, it's pretty essential. Yeah,
and the major mindset shift for me has gone from being embarrassed about my upbringing as a child because we didn't have much money and we did stuff that none of my peers could relate to. I didn't go shopping, I didn't watch TV, I didn't go to the movies, I didn't go to concerts, I didn't do any of that. And that just did make for a really difficult childhood. I'm now kind of learning as I'm growing up, actually not to be so embarrassed about that upbringing, to recognize all the positives that it gave me as well.
Yeah, it's funny, nice things about time and looking back at things, to see like the useful things that happen from stuff that can kind of feel bad at the time.
Yeah, I really think it's a really significant trend, really, is that I'm prepared to bet that for most people, the thing that made you unusual, different, maybe weird even as a kid, has probably gone on to become your superpower in later life. But we've just got such strong pressures to conform to the norm when we're growing up that it can make us have a really, I think, quite difficult relationship with what makes us unique.
Yeah, 100%. It's like a natural thing to want to conform. But it's only when you kind of realise that like, the things that are different within you are usually the things that is where you can give extra value, because if you're just the same as everyone, you don't actually give any extra value anyway.
Yeah.
It's like these unique skills that are the powers that you have. It's a hard one. And then also, general, just the adversity side of things as well, as anything that's kind of difficult or annoying is usually the thing that actually is one of the best things in hindsight. But you kind of, at the time, you're super annoyed by whatever it is. And then afterwards, you're like, wow, I really did something awesome because of that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. The obstacle is the way. Like, for example, you were super annoyed by the whole having to throw away your food, and instead of just being sat there and being annoyed, it's like led to starting an awesome business that's changing the world. And you kind of sit there and look at like problems that come at you. It's those that usually lead to good things.
Yeah, I think it's a universal, isn't it? That the best things come from adversity and hard work and resilience and all that good stuff, even though it doesn't feel like it at the time.
So what do you think about the fact that the world is becoming increasingly easier and just removing frictions from all parts of life? And this is breeding like meta terrible problems? I'm not sure if this is a useful conversation to have, but I ponder it sometimes.
Well, I think I've got a lot better actually at pulling apart those sorts of statements and recognising that there's sort of a cohort of people for whom that is true, but it's an increasingly small privileged group of people. And actually there are millions and millions and millions. My concern is we've got this massive polarisation of society happening where there's this small group of kind of overlords for whom life is becoming more and more convenient, more and more rich. And then there's everybody else who is servicing that wealth and that convenience. And unfortunately, then there's the planet as well, right? Which is also servicing that wealth and that convenience with a very high price to pay. So, yeah, I'm very, very sort of concerned about that, the unsustainable sort of lifestyle that we hold up on a pedestal in many ways, the polarization that's taking place kind of underneath that. And then also linked to that, whilst theoretically, there's this group of people who are becoming richer and their life is more convenient, I do think all of us are now living a life in which we're more connected than we've ever been before. But in parallel, what we've learned through our work at Olio is that we are lonelier than we've ever been before. And so there's data saying that I think sort of 9 million people say that they're always or often lonely. And that for me is just mind-blowing. That's pretty much equivalent to the population of London. And that is because we are missing that sort of that in real life connection. So you're back to that 15-minute grocery delivery. We're losing that opportunity to kind of to go outside, to have that human connection, to interact with someone else. And I'm not 100% sure that's a good thing. Me
too. And I'm really glad I poked the beast there because I 100% agree. It is sort of quite absurd, the amount of, like the dual side of life kind of getting easier in terms of just removing frictions for things like 15-minute groceries and stuff that you just don't need at all. And you just lose touch with kind of what is important. And when you have like your phone with you and you just like all this like stuff of feeling like you need to be connected to things, but then you can't actually sit and have like an actual meal with people. An example is like, it's sort of absurd. You can't even learn how to cook or pay attention for that long because it takes half an hour. So you don't even have to feed yourself. You have to use a delivery anyway. And it's just like, it's not actually helping you in life, really.
No, it's not. And I think sort of at the root cause of all of this is the fact that we have got an economic model that's based on endless consumption and the growth of consumption. And we're consuming all this stuff, the vast majority of which we don't properly utilize. We're destroying the planet in the process, ripping everything out the planet and shipping it and manufacturing it and delivering it everywhere to then sit in people's homes that we use for a fraction of its life. And the vast majority of it ends up in landfill within a couple of years. And we're all working so hard to prop up that economic system. And it's like, if we were just to reduce our rates of consumption, we wouldn't need to produce all this crap that no one needs and no one wants. And we would actually have more time back to spend on things that are uniquely enjoyable because they're uniquely human, whether that be cooking or performing or talking or whatever it might be.
Yeah. 100%. It is ridiculous the amount of things that just come into being because there's a way to make business out of them.
Yeah.
And
the whole sort of marketing industry appeals to our inner monkey brain. It says, bright, shiny thing, acquire it now. And we fall for it every time.
Yeah, definitely. What's the most recent thing you fell for that you're like, I don't actually need this in my life, but I thought I did?
Do you know what? I've been on such a journey over the past couple of years around understanding the truth about the climate crisis. I am utterly terrified. And I've really kind of opted out of mainstream consumption. And so I don't go to the shops anymore.
Wow.
Really. So
As in
kind of my...
You mean like...
Yeah, as in my...
I don't go shopping. I was going to say, I have to buy food
I don't go shopping, but even kind of food shopping, sure. I've changed my habits of consumption. So I go to a zero waste shop and I get a veg box delivery and just kind of consume very differently. And so, I haven't been shopping in years, but actually this weekend I did find myself on Oxford Street, and it was amazing how sort of repulsive and yet beguiling at the same time the whole experience was. I just found myself picking stuff up and almost going to buy it and then realizing, what am I doing? I don't want this. I don't need this. And yet if you place people in that context and in that environment that has been optimized to get you to shop, then of course you will shop. And so for me, kind of the easiest thing to do is just to kind of really opt out of that. And as a result, I've saved so much money and I have so much more time to do other things that are actually way more enjoyable than shopping.
Yeah. So you can't really buy yourself the happiness and things. It's just weird. Cool. What are some of the examples of things that you do instead that are way more wholesome and delightful than shopping?
Well, my favourite sort of new hack, I say new, it's about kind of a year and a bit old now, is batch cooking on the weekends. So I'm trying to kind of solve for many things, and batch cooking does solve for all of them actually. So I'm trying to lead an increasingly zero waste lifestyle and eat more kind of plant-based and organic, and I want to ensure that my kids are kind of eating good food, and I love listening to podcasts. So for me, I'll spend kind of 5 hours over a weekend just batch cooking all of the food, all of the evening meals for the week, and then that means that kind of at the end of the day, when I'm kind of tired after working, just get something out the fridge and just pop it in the oven to heat it up. And it sort of saves time, saves money, great for the environment, great for our health, and is really enjoyable because I get to learn a lot whilst I'm busy listening to podcasts while cooking.
That's epic. Nice. I love doing, tasks that are kind of engaging but give you brain space.
Yeah.
Where you can then do other stuff like that.
Yeah, 100%.
Especially as a founder, when like most of what you do all day requires all your brain, so you can't sort of go into like semi-switched off mode.
Yeah.
But it's really therapeutic when you're just filling in like data for an hour or like cooking, just put on a podcast and like go through the motions of things. That that sounds great.
I go for a sort of a run or a walk or a bike ride every day before I start work. Again, listening to podcasts, and that's actually my kind of highest quality thinking time. And I've had a real mindset shift about that actually, because when I first co-founded Olio, and I recognized that the only way I was going to get exercise was if I did it during the working day. And for the first couple of months, I kept on expecting someone to come and tell me off and, tap on my shoulder and haul me out of the gym and tell me to get back to my desk. And I quickly realized that wasn't going to happen, because I was the boss. And I've now gone even further than that in my thinking, in terms of, I think that is my highest value add time of the working day. I do my best quality work when I'm exercising, because that's when I listen to podcasts. I've got time to switch off, and that's when kind of all the breakthrough thinking really happens. And
100%.
Yeah, it's just so
long been an advocate of that. So I used to be a developer, and like I generally take like a longer lunch break to go to the gym.
Yeah.
And like I could have just gone before work or after work, but I find it really useful to go in the middle, because I'd be sort of stuck in some problems or something, and I'd go to the gym with a problem, and I'd leave it having solved it, stepped away from the thing that I'd been burying down into like a problem that I wasn't able to solve, but just been like, well, obviously I should just do it this way. And it was so good, but then like I had to often explain to people like, it's really useful, like I'm kind of doing work, and they're like, oh, why are you taking so long with the lunch break? I'm like, it's genuinely actually helping me.
Yeah.
And then certainly the same as running the business, I always try and like have a 2-hour break away from things, which is maybe a bit long, but it just sort of, it's enough to really go for like a proper long run, and then like gather your thoughts and think about different stuff and have proper ideas and learn all in one go.
Yeah.
It's epic. And as a consistent habit, it really pays itself back.
Yeah, it's sort of a win on every front. It's like you get physically strong, it's great for your mental health, and you do super high quality thinking for your business. So what's not to love?
Well, I'm all for that. More advertising and podcasts. Winning. Cool. So then there's a few other things that I kind of like to generally ask people. But before we go into that, is there anything I haven't asked you that I think I should ask you?
Well, given this is about mindsets, I think there are a couple of other sort of mindset shifts I've had through the Olio journey, which I've found sort of quite interesting. The first one was one that I had to have right at the very beginning, which was, if you bear in mind that I was sort of coming from a corporate career and I was fairly senior. And when you sort of head up a division or a business unit in the corporate world, you are expected to be sort of the expert in your area and your domain and to know everything and to set out a strategy and some targets that this is what we'll achieve this year, and et cetera, et cetera. And what I realized through founding a startup is that you actually have to completely rewrite your mindset and recognize that actually on day one, you know 0% of anything. And you have to kind of embrace the fact that you don't know most things about the problem that you're trying to solve. And then you just have to set out and really try and learn as quickly as possible. And especially in the early days when I'd be kind of asked lots of questions by investors or by the media, and I used to feel this enormous pressure to feel like I had to have the answer to everything. And then I realized, no, it doesn't matter that I don't have the answer. What matters is that I have a repeatable process that can help me figure out the answer. So that was just a massive mindset shift. And then very closely linked into that, super early on in the founding of Olio, both Sasha, my co-founder, and I, we read a book called The Lean Startup. And I'm sure that's something that many of your listeners are really familiar with. And that whole model of kind of test, measure, learn, and just do that on a rapid loop, for me, was really, really game changing in terms of how we approached building everything we did at Olio. And even now that we're a much, much bigger business, we always start off doing anything sort of with MVP. And in more recent years, I've also applied that logic and approach to my own life and thinking, well, actually, why don't I experiment more with how I live? And say exercise being a classic example. And I'm constantly trying new models and new things to figure out what works for me. And I guess I hadn't thought of myself in that way and as being kind of as malleable as I could be. And I found that really, really a helpful way of thinking about things.
Yeah, that's super important because I think it is something you struggle with, especially when everyone is coming to you for answers. As the founder, you kind of feel like you're sort of, I don't know, almost like an imposter, or like you have to lie to people that you know everything, and you kind of realize that actually you're the one whose job is to figure things out. You don't have to have the answer straight away. You just need to know how to find answers and get there.
Yeah.
It's a lot more relieving. And yeah, the Lean Startup is a great method of working that all out, which is, yeah, something that I think also comes from like a scientific background, or apparently from being a farmer as well, around like just being resourceful and just trying different things and using whatever you have as your tools available to you to like work things out. It's a good one. So thanks for letting me know about those other mindset shifts, because I would have felt a bit silly to have interviewed you for an hour and not learned about those things. Cool. And how about, because you spoke about like the mindset shifts you've had in your customers around just trying to compete with the bin for them, but do you think there's much you can do around changing people's mindsets in general? Because I think that you have been tapping into a general mindset shift towards the climate, which is why like your commercialization initial strategy is now available to you that wasn't there before. But what else do you think is going to be happening in the next sort of 4 or 5 years that's started that would be like,
yeah, I do think that a mindset shift, thankfully, is happening as we speak with regards to the climate crisis. And I think that COVID was a really helpful accelerant in that, because it did enforce for many people the great pause, and we kind of had an opportunity for the first time ever to stop and reflect. And many things that we thought were critical and essential for our lives, like, I don't know, my daily Starbucks coffee, we suddenly realized actually we can survive without these things. And we also connected with our local communities in a way that we had never done before, whilst in parallel, unprecedented weather events were kind of coming into our homes via our TV screens, and it was feeling like they were happening kind of on our doorsteps. So there has been a massive mindset shift and also language shift, because even a couple of years ago, climate crisis was being talked about in terms of our grandchildren. Whereas now, and quite rightly so, it's being talked about as something that is unfolding. Well, it's already here. It's already impacting millions of people, killing millions of people every year. And it's going to kill and impact millions and millions more absolutely in our lifetime. Within the next 10, 20, 30 years, where it's going to get a heck of a lot worse. So, and I don't say that to frighten people, but it's the truth. And what is good is that we're now all talking about this. And I do feel that we have started to move beyond these sort of, is it real and does it really impact me? To us, everybody collectively realizing it is real, it is happening, and it is going to impact me. And so now people are starting to think, well, what can I do? And in terms of sort of mindsets, we have found at Olio that it is important to have, for us, roughly about kind of 20% of your comms that is telling the truth. It is the fearful stuff. And that gives the why for people as to why they should bother to do anything. But then we spend 80% of our communications focused on the positive. Here's what you can do. Here's the solutions. Here's how great it will feel. Here's your impact. And I think that's really, really important to kind of galvanize people at scale. We have got to be leading with a positive message and a positive vision for the future. And we've got to give people really, really small, easy, tangible steps that they can all take starting today. And so a lot of work that we've been doing has been borrowing from the fields of behavioral psychology and also the research into habits and how habits are formed. And we try and kind of leverage that and then flow it through our marketing communications and also how we build our product to really try and encourage people to take those baby steps, because all we need is lots of people to take small baby steps, and collectively that adds up to transformative change.
Exactly. Which people often don't really feel aware of.
No, people feel unempowered.
Like one small number and like whatever they do won't make a difference, but like it's such a big difference. But if everyone goes and does what you do, same with like making a vote or something, so if one person's kind of insignificant, but it's the entire population. Nice. Glad I asked about that. Thank you very much for the kindness you've given to me and the listeners for coming on the show despite having COVID.
No worries.
I had to mute because I had my own coughing fit during the episode.
Yeah, I'm sort of,
We're fine.
Yeah, my brain has felt not 100% engaged, so I hope I've managed to be clear and succinct enough.
Yeah, I did not notice at all. Some great moments. So I was definitely there being like, oh, this is awesome. Super happy.
Oh, good stuff.
So, yeah, I had lots of fun. And thanks so much for coming on the show.
Lovely. Well, it was lovely chatting to you. Thank you so much for having me on.
My pleasure.
Thanks a bundle for listening. If you liked it, share it, rate it. Remember, growth is all about consistency and persistency. So keep showing up and keep showing love. And if you want to enjoy your life, start by enjoying your day.